So here we are, the collateral and the backing for wars, which we are simply put on the books to be part of. And we know that too. We understand that part of it. We accept it at least. And most people are able to suppress or even deny their complicity in what's happening in the world. And yet part of their paycheck is taken to go to many, many things which they might not personally agree with. If they were to sit and dwell upon them at all. But in the mass man of today, they find it difficult to look at themselves honestly, almost impossibly so. Unless you understand yourself, the conscious and the unconscious part, the raging sea of unconsciousness, you won't understand your own part in this, and you'll deny it to the end. That's why old Christianity gave you a devil. It was such a burden to bear, the understanding of guilt and complicity in evil. It was easier to throw this on top of some other deity and let them take responsibility. Or in the old Judaic scapegoat, where they'd set it off into the desert to carry the sins of the people. If only it were that easy. I remember an old Star Trek episode, one of the first ones, the first series, where on board the ship comes a man who, he was using sort of stage makeup. Half his face was white, the other half was black. And he's trying to get them all to get ready to fight this enemy that was coming. Well, his enemy was an exact duplicate of himself, exact. Only the other part of the face was white and the other part was black. The dualism, the yin and yang in humankind, unconscious, the conscious. The unconscious will always project its problems onto an enemy. Any enemy will do. And unfortunately, the longer the enemy appears to exist, the more fixed and embedded that becomes. This is understood with those who run the world. And that's why they'll like to have ongoing wars and clashes and intergenerational wars as they guide the whole process into a predetermined conclusion, with always an unexpected answer to it all. And yet those at the end are so exhausted they're willing to take anything, and that's generally what they get. The complexity of the human mind is sometimes overblown, for everyone has projected their own problems, their own faults, frailties onto other people at some time. The allegories of Adam and Eve, although there's many levels of that, not the exoteric stuff that's taught in the churches, but even a lower level, when Eve was tempted and then questioned later on as to why she broke the law, she immediately said, well, in essence, well, the devil tempted her, the devil made her do it. And because of Adam's own personal needs in that woman, when he was questioned, he blamed Eve for bringing it to him. The honest answer was because I wanted to. I wanted what was promised. That would have been Eve's honest answer. It's easy to project that something else made you do it. I used to always think it odd that people who were working in factories or in stores or in trades could be conscripted and exchange one uniform of the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker for another, and suddenly they're a soldier. They no longer belong to the public, they're privates. they're privately owned. As though we could suddenly switch identities from doing something which we need and society would approve of to something which is destructive, where the end results benefit someone else, in fact, never those involved in the conflict. And still go to parades and Veterans Days and put on their old berets and sort of toddle along trying to march as though that's the proudest thing they'd ever done, was swapping their old job, their old identity for this temporary new one, even though they still today can't figure out what was really behind it, except the propaganda they were fed at that time, which never changes with them until they die. They can't look beyond all of that. And yet with some of the veterans meetings I've had in the last 20 years, maybe even 15 years, that brought Germans, for instance, Canadians and Americans together. And once they have their Masonic booze up, and most of them are in the veterans clubs, Masons, they're surprised how they're all so similar. And so are their war stories so similar, because they all stood up for their friends. They saw their friends getting killed, and it's like one big soccer match that got out of hand, in a sense. But they can commiserate with each other because they were all doing what they thought they were supposed to do. They were all the victims of propaganda at the time, and now they can all be friends. We should be scared out of our boots at that powers above us can get ordinary people to go off and kill each other on command, and yet when they're left to themselves they can be the best of friends. That should terrify us, to see how easily we are manipulated. That should strike terror into everyone's hearts, because these are sciences well understood by a select few near the top. We're bound together by so many treaties and legalities. We're put down for the debts the governments borrow. Every person in every nation is put down as collateral to pay off loans, debts. We're put down as parts of treaties to stand up for other countries and partnerships of war and peace. We're complicit in everything that these boring people at the top with their boring speeches puts us into, and yet we don't participate openly in any of the decision making. It's done on the subconscious and the unconscious level. If I'm okay and me and mine are fine and people are keeping off my back as much as possible, then I don't really care what's happening anywhere else. That's a short-sighted attitude, because eventually when the dominoes fall it comes round to you, and there's no one there to keep you propped up. This is not any kind of democracy at all. If you look into the histories of the United States, there was a tremendous anti-Masonic movement in the 1800s after Morgan, a Freemason who wrote out openly. He published a book on some of the intents of Freemasonry. He was a member and he was executed by Freemasons for doing so. And afterwards some of the US senators even, who were either very naive or out the loop, spoke out, and one of them said it was impossible to bring these people to justice because Freemasonry had taken over every important position on the national level to the local level. And that is the MO of Freemasonry. It's a monopoly, a secret monopoly of power. A religion underneath all the religions and behind and often dominating all the other religions. And it's been here for a long time. It attracts the worst types because the one thing they've always allowed the public to know is that it helps you get on in life if you join. Unmerited favor in the choice of jobs and promotions and so on. Well, what type would be attracted to something when they knew nothing about it except it helps you get on, even if you don't have the abilities or credentials? You find the corrupt types go into it. And for those ones who've joined the Catholic lodges thinking they were anti-Protestant, read your histories, you'll find it's nonsense. Even when they first applied for a charter from the Pope, or permission, in reality they already had a charter given by the Grand Lodge, but they applied to have it made official, and the Pope actually banned it when he went over it. Every pre-Masonic group that has in the past fought another Masonic group has been controlled by the same capstone in every country. Wars must be real, conflict must be real for those that fight and take the consequences, but it's not important that they understand at the top the conflict is necessary for another part of an agenda, and their body is simply the tool being used. They don't have the right to know the real reasons behind it. Albert Pike made that quite clear when he even talked in his own book, the old Bible of Freemasonry, that a Mason must go and serve his country regardless of the country when called. Conflict is necessary in this system for the changes that must be made to bring about your utopia, the hell on earth. Utopia for some. When I was young, really small, I used to listen to all the chatter that happened in the world I was living in, and my daily routines, and realized that most of the chatter even then was simply the reiteration of magazines or TV or radio news, and yet it was done with such exuberance with little groups, chatter, 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 gossip. And I pictured all the words that's ever been spoken on the planet going off into space, all joined together, and wondering how far on the galaxy it would loop to come back and mean absolutely nothing. And then I pictured generations of people who'd lived and died, all the graveyards on the planet where people had done all the right things as they were supposed to do according to tradition of the time, and never knew what was going on. Generations and generations have had the right to consciousness stolen, robbed, living and dying and never knowing. Just the external stuff that's fed to them by later historians, the whitewashed, sifted flower that comes out of history. I mentioned before that some people in the past and present, and it's something that certain individuals will come to in every generation, when they do understand this topic I'm on today, they come to the conclusion that perhaps it's not all good people who are up against a minority of bad people. Perhaps there's only a minority of good people. And that rankles us because we always think of ourselves as being good. We follow the rules of the system we live in. We do the socially acceptable things according to the laws and rules and traditions that have been drawn up for us. And sure enough, you can be in trouble and people come to your aid, hopefully. Hopefully that still works today if you're allowed to without FEMA intervention. We can help each other and we'll say we are good people. And on that basis we are. But how easily we can stop ourselves from being good to others, people we don't know, people we see on the one-eyed monster of TV, locked in a death struggle with others in either a traditional war or a recent conflict, and it doesn't affect us. Why can we switch on and switch off? The reason being that we help others around us, close to us. Maybe one day they'll help us if need be. We can't imagine those over yonder helping us. You see, so we're selfish in a sense. When you give, you do it because you want to give, not because you expect something in return. Every motive has to be questioned on a personal level. Recently someone sent me one of the many DVDs that are out there on some of the history of Freemasonry, done by that select group of the usual people who lead this, and I have to tell those who live on this kind of stuff, it's almost like a hobby. They feed on it. They like to be astounded through this amazing secretive organization and learn little things and quips about them. In reality, there's nothing out there that they haven't allowed you to know. And to hear people who are supposedly learned talk about the exoteric over and over, to me personally, it becomes boring. They make it sound almost exciting the way that they question Freemasonry and try to expose it. It's the best recruitment technique there is, actually, because the young always go towards the forbidden fruit. It's nature. In fact, I think Pike and Mackay also said that it was the best recruitment drive there ever was, is when the government of the US, for a very short period, pretended to clamp down on Freemasonry. It made it an exciting thing for the youth to want to grow up, to become, to get into. That's standard. That's what happens. If you tell me don't take drugs, don't smoke, it makes it more appealing. That's what happens. But people who seem to be educated will still have their biases, and many of these videos are put out there by exoteric Christianity, those who understand on an intellectual level the concepts of Christianity, but they miss the esoteric because the numinous experience isn't there with it. The idealistic experience that's supposed to be a transcendent experience, which isn't a sudden, limited, short-lasting thing. It's a life-altering thing. It's an understanding which comes supposedly with it. They miss that because they're formalized Christians. Formalized Christians are traditional Christians, cultural Christians. The whole idea of a transcendent figure to follow was meant to be an example for those to come, idealistically. When you get caught up in tradition, you lose the meaning of anything, any truth. This happens over and over in every people, culture, and religion. You end up joining a club, a social club, or a tribal club, it doesn't matter. And tribal clubs tend to club each other to death eventually, if they have a slight difference of opinion or belief. They used to say that the road to heaven was narrow. That's a clue. It was never meant for the mass of humanity. For even in ancient times they understood the masses, those who stay within the mass. And you can tell them by their topics of conversation. They would always take the broad way, Broadway. Even the names are written down in streets to give you clues. The material world is what it meant. Something that is tangible, the material world. Most people will always rush towards that which they can easily understand and hope to conquer or grab a piece of. So a word of caution for those who think that they can simply join an organization like Freemasonry or the OTO or whatever happens to be trendy in your area at the time. There's many tendrils coming out of that pyramid. You will not get any secrets which will alter your life. You won't get high enough to get anything off the truth. Little snippets, little things that will say, oh wow, I didn't know that flash meant this, etc. But that's nothing at all. That's nothing which will change humanity or yourself for that matter. Maybe make you more corrupt. That might even compromise you into silence when you should speak up. And you might be used and told to do something. But you certainly won't be given a truth at that level. You have to be groomed for that in the right families to have the higher knowledge, not the outer stuff, the portico, as Pike calls it himself. Albert Pike was way beyond 33rd. And Albert Pike did not write that book by himself either. Specialists wrote that book, specialists in different areas. You can take most books today, put out there, and people read the exoteric and everything because they have never examined themselves in any depth whatsoever. It's only by examining yourself does the esoteric hit you and you understand it. Plus a little bit of study into different areas. Today people want package deals like package tours or drive-through coffee and donuts. Here's the money, give me what I want, and off they go. That's just a hobby. That's the lazy person's way. To come to any understanding in this world takes a lot of work. And the breaking into consciousness on an individual level can be a hard task for many people. Too hard for most people. You, like a staging rocket, must leave many parts of yourself behind, the old you in different phases as you ascend. And because you're doing it yourself, you simply cannot pass on the experiences to other people who want formula and ritual. That is what religion is for. It's for the mass. That's why you go to the mass. It's for the masses. Something simple to understand on a certain level through ritual and formality and repetition. It's all done for you. There's no real participation except to follow the rituals themselves, which you need not even understand on a deep level. The traditional levels are generally good enough for most people. We can't possibly stop immediately the evil in this world, especially when it's been here since at least the beginning of money, and the potential had to exist prior to that. For the evil that's wrought in the world could be wrought by any one of us under different circumstances. How can you keep yourself in check if you don't know yourself? You leave that to the formalized rules of culture and law, which is the big deterrent. But how many people really check themselves? We'll all say we're good people. But what is good? Who defines the good? If good is not doing harm to others, then we're all pretty bad, since we allow ourselves to be taxed and that money to be used by organizations and departments which employ educable people who will work consistently creating weapons of mass destruction and project it onto their enemies for doing the same thing. Are we really that good when we allow it to happen? When even a formal complaint to a government saying, look, I object to this, this is not a human thing to do, or a humane thing to do, according to our conscience, not by our religious conscience or traditional conscience or whatever cultural conscience we've been given, but your personal conscience. And you can always add, I know I can't do anything else except complain to you, but at least you've stated your position. It's better than nothing. Nothing is always easier, certainly. And being the cowards most people are, they don't realize the more they retreat into cowardice, the more their bill is going to be at the end. Because what goes around comes around, and they'd wish they'd had the time to do all the complaining when there is no time to do it and no one to complain to. I've watched people put money into situations in Africa and other countries to promote the Western ideas of business and culture and values. And I've thought about it deeply and thought, you know, that in other words, the only way out of the morass, which is generally deculturalization of a people, where their traditions have been destroyed by exploitation from outsiders with another culture, supposedly a superior one, we give them the values and then expect them to simply emulate what we do, which is a value system of exploitation of others, all the way down the ladder to the people at the bottom. And so we teach them to exploit their own, in a sense. In fact, the better education we give them, the more they'll end up being better exploiters. There's a dilemma there, a tremendous dilemma that people don't think about when they give their money to the charities. You're teaching a select bunch, chosen out of millions perhaps, to have a chance of survival in a corrupt system, but the values they'd have to adopt, although they're approved by the dominant cultural system, are still corrupt. So they end up exploiting those below. I can remember in the old TV evangelists, they would bring over certain people that to become doctors, etc., and started off in orphanages, grown up in orphanages, Christian orphanages. And it would be nice if they'd said, well, I do this for free, or for very little, or I survive on donations. But no, they're applauded because they wear the suit and the tie, the business Masonic suit of the West. They have their letters behind their name. And they're becoming wealthy, which means they're exploiting others. It's rather sad we say people to exploit others. We have to find a new way. And people are choosing all the time in the direction in which they will go. In the 20th century, as we progressed towards the greatest destructions of all through our wonderful sciences and human efforts, and we watched art disintegrate into nihilism, we watched the cultural flux, the sea almost, like a scale going up and down between different ages, come to pass. And as the Greek called the old Chaos, the right time, it was the right time for the metamorphosis of the gods, because the gods change between ages, although they're reborn with different names, always the same, always the same. Because the humankind apparently needs the gods which are given to them by those who guide them, their shepherds. And we've watched this destruction of the old through the family units and all the stuff that came before, and most people who bewail that fact never realize that the family units were given to you as well to serve a purpose for a particular age and agenda. Even a breeding program for workers for the industrial age, which is no longer necessary. And prior to that, as I say, we've lived in tribes where there was no real marriage as such, although couples could do what they wanted to at a certain age. They could pair off. If they were older and more mature, some of them did, according to the ancient historians. But the marriage system, after the destruction of tribes, had been used in the ancient world long before it was brought to Europe to serve a materialistic, monetary type wealth system of dominance, with the artificial creation of money, or of wealth really. The only true wealth you have is what the American Indians used to say, it's the home on which you sit at the time. It's that which feeds you, where you can grow things, where you can live. That's your home at the time. That's real estate. That's why it's called real estate, which must mean in the world of opposites there's a fake estate. So much for my spontaneous blurb tonight. It's been a long week for me, and I hope you glean something from that which I've said. Good night for me, from Hamish, my dog, as well, and may your God go with you.